Jacques Austerlitz has spent his entire professional life studying architecture. Railway stations, fortresses, libraries, the great institutional buildings of Europe. He can tell you exactly how a structure disciplines space, how it channels movement, how it imposes order on chaos. What he cannot tell you, what he doesn't know for decades, is why. Sebald published Austerlitz in 2001, the last novel before his death in a car accident that same year. It was immediately recognized as a masterpiece, and it's usually discussed in terms of memory, trauma, and the Holocaust. All of that is true. But the novel is doing something more precise than staging a confrontation with history. It's studying the relationship between buildings and forgetting. Here is the setup. Jacques Austerlitz was born in Prague in 1934 to a Jewish family. At the age of 4, he was placed on a kindertransport and sent to Wales, where he was raised by a Calvinist preacher and his wife under the name David Elias. He grew up not knowing his own name, his own language, his own history. He became an architectural historian. That last detail is the one Sebald wants you to sit with. Of all the things a man severed from his past might become, Austerlitz became a scholar of structures, not a psychologist, not a historian, a man who spends his life inside buildings, analyzing how they contain and organize human activity. And the question the novel asks, without ever quite stating it, is whether his entire intellectual life has been a search for the one building he cannot consciously remember. That building is the Hlavní nádraží, Prague's main railway station. The place where his mother brought him as a small child and put him on a train to a country whose language he didn't speak. He doesn't remember this. He has no memory of Prague, no memory of his parents, no memory of departure. What he has is an inexplicable fascination with the way stations are built. Consider what a railway station actually is. It's a building designed around departure. It exists to move people from one life into another. The architecture of a station, the vaulted ceilings, the iron ribs, the vast concourses, gives weight and permanence to what is fundamentally an experience of transit. Stations make leaving feel important. They give ceremony to disappearance. Austerlitz has been studying this his entire adult life. He can explain the structural logic of Antwerp Central, the disciplinary geometry of a star fortress, the institutional ambitions of the Bibliothèque Nationale. He understands how power expresses itself through space. But he has missed, or rather, his conscious mind has refused to process, the most obvious interpretation of his own obsession. When Austerlitz finally returns to Prague and stands in the station, Sebald describes a feeling of recognition that has no content. Austerlitz knows he has been here. He cannot remember being here. The building is simultaneously familiar and opaque. This is the condition the entire novel has been building toward. A man standing inside the architecture of his own trauma, possessing every analytical tool to understand what the building does, and unable to apply any of them to himself. Sebald layers this with his characteristic photographs, blurry, often unlabeled images of buildings, rooms, doorways. They function the way Austerlitz's knowledge functions, as evidence of something that happened in a particular space without access to what that something was. The photographs don't illustrate the text. They demonstrate the gap between seeing a place and knowing what it held. What makes this more than a novel about recovered memory is Sebald's refusal to let recovery feel like healing. When Austerlitz learns his history, finds his name, traces his mother to Terezín, discovers the likely facts of her death, the knowledge doesn't complete him. If anything, it reveals how much his architecture of understanding was a defense. The fortress he had built out of professional expertise was doing the same thing every building does, keeping the outside out. There is a passage where Austerlitz describes how certain buildings seem designed to make their inhabitants forget what lies beyond the walls. Libraries, he observes, are built to create the illusion that all knowledge is contained within them. Fortresses are built to make the world outside seem like the threat. What he doesn't say, what Sebald trusts us to hear, is that Austerlitz himself is one of these buildings. A structure organized around an absence, designed so perfectly that even its architect doesn't know what it's protecting him from. This is what the novel is actually about. Not the Holocaust as historical event, though it never minimizes that. Not trauma as psychological condition, though it renders that precisely. Austerlitz is about the buildings we construct, intellectual, emotional, professional, around the things we cannot face. And it suggests that the more elegant the structure, the deeper the burial. Sebald died weeks after publication. He never wrote another novel, and there is something fitting, if unbearable, about the fact that his final work is about a man who spent a lifetime building an elaborate edifice of knowledge, only to discover it was built on the exact ground he'd been running from.